pretty grim, to be honest. I mean, look, the BBC is well used to being at the centre of negative headlines, and staff there have thick skin. But, you know, it is I think it is unprecedented for them to lose the Director General and the Head of News in a single day over a scandal.
The BBC has apologised to President Trump over an edit of his January the 6th speech on the day of the Capitol riots, but the corporation is refusing to pay him compensation. They say that what happened is not defamatory. The Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, Lisa Nandy, spoke to Times Radio Breakfast. She said she's confident in the BBC's legal argument.
Well, I'm not a lawyer, but they are correct that the programme was not aired in the United States, that it was not available to people overseas on iPlayer, that there were other voices in that piece that spoke on behalf of President Trump and in support of his candidacy. And of course, he went on to win that election. That's the legal grounds that the BBC has laid out that they believe mitigates any accusation of defamation. But of course, I think it's right that they've taken legal advice. I think it's also right that they've apologised.
Well, Alex Farber, the Times media correspondent, joins me now because the corporation is facing a new row because it turns out this same speech was edited basically in the same way, from what I can work out, in a Newsnight programme which went out in 2022. Alex Farber, what's all this about?
Well, in some respects, it's the last thing they needed.
Yes.
You know, as if they're not already staring down the barrel of a $1 billion lawsuit from President Trump over one programme. They've found that there's been a similar edit done on another flagship show, Newsnight, as you say, in 2022.
And it was spotted by this guy, Mick Mulvaney, who complained at the time. He had been President Trump's chief of staff. So you would have thought in 2022, once bitten, twice shy, there should have been a system to flag this up.
Well, yeah, spotted is a strong word. I mean, he was on the show. He watched the clip and then he responded to it and said to Kirsty Walker, who was the presenter at the time, look, that's not quite how things went down that day.
So literally on the show.
On the show itself. But the extent to which that was formally flagged, the extent to which there were any complaints, you know, these things are not known at the moment. So if it's a guy countering it on the show itself and then everyone moves on to a degree, you know, then is the BBC aware that it's got a wider potential issue with the way in which it has edited that particular speech, in which Trump did call for people to go to the Capitol and fight like hell?
Now, Alex, you're one of the most respected media commentators in the country, and you're all over.
There's only a couple of us.
You're all over this story. Give us a sense of the mood in BBC Towers.
Well, it's pretty grim, to be honest. I mean, look, the BBC is well used to being at the centre of negative headlines, and staff there have thick skin. But, you know, it is I think it is unprecedented for them to lose the Director General and the Head of News in a single day over a scandal. So, despite the fact that they are well used to wearing these things, it feels pretty bad at Broadcasting House at the moment.
Now, everyone is certain elements are trying to paint this BBC board member, Robbie Gibb, a former Director of Communications for the Conservative Party, but also a former editor of a BBC flagship political programme, as the villain in the piece. To a certain extent, the sort of Get Robbie Gibb campaign seems to have gone a bit quiet. Is it likely to resume? Are people going to want his head as a sort of compensatory scalp for the head of Tim Davie?
Well, look, as you mentioned, Lisa Nandy, the Culture Secretary, she's already made clear that she's got no powers to remove Robbie Gibb from the board, were she minded to. If she did, I'm not sure that would necessarily help the BBC's cause when it comes to trying to tell everyone how impartial it is. But yeah, look, Robbie Gibb, the extent to which his influence is significant is debated. It depending on who you talk to. But there's no doubting he's a polarising figure. I mean, you've probably know him better than I do, Ed. What would you say?
Yeah, I like Robbie Gibb a lot, but I also do feel Robbie quite revels in having a sort of slightly Machiavellian air about him. I'm interested in Tim Davie in the next few months, because it could take up to 9 months to appoint a new Director General. You've got to get a headhunter in and all this sort of jazz. Is he going to be a lame duck DG? Is he going to be able to make any... Because Charter Review is going to be happening as he kind of sits here in limbo.
Yeah, that's right. There's a ticking clock around all of this, which is the charter negotiations that the BBC has to do and will continue to do with government ahead of the expiration of the current charter in 2028, and that means setting out its governance, I should say, and its funding models. And look, Davies said that he's going to stick around whilst they find his successor to help continue those conversations. And we are, 18 months out or so, but, they do need to get a move on when it comes to getting a new DG in place. When they appointed Davey 5 years ago, he was an internal hire. I think the job advert went out in around February. He didn't start until September. And that was a guy just moving across the road, as it were, from BBC Studios, the commercial arm. So, if it's an external candidate, depending on where they come from, what their notice period looks like, that's all unclear. But, the BBC will want to be getting on with this thing at pace. But at the same time, as well with the BBC, it has to follow the processes.
It's interesting, some of the names that have come up. Alex Marner used to run Channel 4. She went through a bruising ordeal with the last government on privatisation. Jay Hunt, who works at Apple, used to be head of BBC 2, I think, or maybe BBC One.
BBC News.
She must be earning an absolute fortune. Mm-hmm. Why would people like that want to take a job like being Director General of the BBC?
Well, there's two reasons, to be honest. I think for those two particularly, the first one, which applies to anyone working in the media, is that it is the job. You take a job on like the DG, not for the money, but you take it on because, you believe passionately in public service broadcasting. You believe that the BBC is a force for good, and you think that you are the right person to lead that organisation. And secondly, for Alex and Jay, and as you identify then, you've got the opportunity to become the first female Director General of the BBC, which wouldn't be a small step.
Yeah, that's a good point. And is George Osborne's name being bandied around just for the giggles, or is he potentially a serious candidate?
I mean, again, you probably know George Osborne better than me, but he was asked about it by his mate Ed Balls on the podcast, and he certainly didn't rule himself out. He said that as they prepare to do these negotiations with the Treasury, am I allowed to swear? Can I say bar?
Can you say what?
He knows these bastards better than.
Oh yes. Oh yes, he's bastards.
Yeah, we get a shrug from the producer. He knows these guys. He knows these guys in the Treasury better than anyone. So he's well placed to do so. Is he mischief making? Is he a serious contender? I mean, look, I'll tell you one thing. He's not like within the BBC. He had a pretty fraught settlement with Tony Hall.
He
Davies'
shoved
predecessor.
the pensioners' free licence onto the BBC licence fee. I had to deal with it as the minister.
So they won't be clapping him into broadcasting if he gets the job. They
certainly won't be clapping that so and so in to be Director of the BBC. And may I issue a formal apology just to keep Ofcom off my back for Alex Farber's spectacularly bad language, but he was just quoting George Osborne on his podcast. Alex Farber, the brilliant Times media correspondent, thank you for taking us through a quick fire analysis of the goings on at the BBC, which was extraordinarily entertaining. Thank you very much.